Today's lecture is over ethics, and ethics is a complex concept that you could spend literally decades of your life studying and you'd still only scratch the surface. It's a concept that's been studied by philosophers, by politicians, by business people, even by engineers, as today's society places a great deal of emphasis on ethics in our training, in our degree programs. But today we're going to look at it mainly as it pertains to public speaking and a little bit just in general when it comes to academe. So ethics can be defined as the study of moral conduct or how people should act toward one another. And that word should is kind of a funny word, how people should act. Well, the way I feel like I should act toward you may be different than the way you feel like I should act towards you, or that you should act toward me. Everybody's perspective is slightly different, which is part of what makes ethics so tricky. Ethics in public speaking vary widely, but it's mainly centered on the responsibility that we have to ourselves and to our audience. We'll get into that just a little bit more in just a minute. The bottom line is that ethics are what we would consider to be moral guidelines as opposed to actual laws. There are plenty of books of ethics that outline exactly how we should behave and who we should be treating what way, but in our general lives, ethics are really just guidelines. Now, one of my favorite storylines out there is Spider-Man. And so this is just a clip from a famous scene. The most famous line out of any Spider-Man story arc is where Uncle Ben is speaking to young Peter Parker, and he says, "With great power comes great responsibility." I've always applied this to public speaking because public speaking really is, it's a great honor that we have when we get the opportunity. And it gives you a lot of power over other people in that situation. And so, since public speaking is something that is very powerful, we need to take care with that responsibility. With great power comes great responsibility. So your basic responsibilities are these. 1, you need to know what you're talking about. Do whatever research you need to do. Make sure everyone knows where that research came from. You don't want to be known as a sophist. If you recall back to that lecture, we talked about the sophists. Sophists were known as abusers of public discourse because the truth didn't matter to them. All that mattered was that they could convince an audience. So you need to tell the truth. If for no other reason than people trust you when you get up in front of them. Because why else would you be there unless you're the expert and you know what you're talking about? The word ethics comes from a Greek word, ethos. That Greek word means character, as in someone's personal character or moral virtue. Aristotle would say that if a speaker has good character, the audience is more likely to listen to them and to trust them. So ethos meant a lot to Aristotle, which is why he included it in his artistic proofs. If you recall, ethos, pathos, and logos. So ethos is a Greek word that means character or moral virtue. So you see the question there, who would you rather listen to? Someone who knows their stuff or someone who knows nothing about a subject? Whereas there can be some entertainment value in listening to someone who has no idea what they're talking about. If it's information that we are truly relying on, we need to know that the source of information we have is accurate, that it is true. When you are considering sources for your speeches in the future or for papers that you write for other classes or what have you, or just consuming information. When you're considering the source, you can consider these questions. Who is the speaker? Do I know their name? Do they have a good reputation? Things along those lines. If you don't know anything about the person, look at their credentials. Are they an expert in the field? Do they have a doctorate? Do they have some kind of credential that makes them the expert? Other times, you're looking at what somebody's saying. You're listening to them simply because you know their name, their celebrity, whether that's an actor or it's a musician or it's a politician. Maybe the only reason you're listening is because you know their name. But the bottom line is you want to ask yourself the question and be able to answer it. Why should I listen to this person? Why should I believe anything that they have to say? Our ethical conduct is a reflection of our values. That word values is important here. Values are our most enduring judgments or standards of what is good and bad in life, what is important to us. The key part of that is the word enduring or most enduring judgments. Our values stick with us pretty much for life. Only in rare situations do core values change in an individual. And it's not something that's changed lightly or easily. And so those core values that we have form the way we treat other people. And that's our ethical conduct. Now, this is part of ethics, and don't worry, I'm not going to sing to you R-E-S-P-E-C-T. I'll leave that to an Aretha Franklin number. But respect can be simply termed treating people right. And that word right can be tricky, I know, but that's another lecture for another time. What's right and what's wrong. But what we have here is a list of terms that are really the opposite of being respectful. You have ethnocentrism, which is a term that we've discussed in a prior lecture. It's the idea of being culture-centered, that everything revolves around your own perspective, your own culture, and anything outside of that is backwards and wrong. Then we have stereotypes. Stereotypes can be harmful, they can be hurtful. You need to stay away from derogatory stereotypes. Stereotypes are typically going to be based on a group of people and behaviors associated with that group. And so, obviously, there are some that are more harmless and some that are more derogatory, and we always stay away from the derogatory ones. Just in general, we try to stay away from most stereotypes. Hate speech can be defined as any offensive communication, which is very vague in general, but that's kind of how it's defined in the law books. But any offensive communication that's based on things like race, ethnicity, religious beliefs, or other characteristics that are protected under law. We then have fighting words. Fighting words are words that are meant to incite violence, that are meant to start a fight, or to get people riled up so that they'll do something violent. You want to obviously stay away from those. That's also something that you can get into legal trouble for. And then lastly, here on this list, you have slander. Slander is issuing defamatory statements. To defame someone means to damage their name, maybe impacting their ability to make a living or something along those lines. Slander is the spoken word. If you put it into writing, it's what's called libel. Libel's illegal because it's in print. It's something that's permanent. Slander is not illegal, it's just unethical. Now we move on to the plagiarism discussion that you pretty much have to have in almost every academic class because for some reason people still try it. Plagiarism is passing off someone else's work as your own without giving the proper credit. We have a couple of different types here. You have wholesale plagiarism, which is where you copy and paste someone else's work directly into yours. You don't even try to hide the fact that you stole it. It's just a copy and paste kind of thing. Not only is it unethical, but it's also incredibly lazy. And then you have what's called patch-right plagiarism. Patch-right plagiarism is rearranging someone else's words, their work, into your own. This is the one people do more ignorantly. In other words, they may not know any better. So it's one that you need to watch out for yourself. Sometimes people think that because they rephrase something into their own words, they don't need to give credit where credit is due, or give credit to the original author. Whenever you use someone else's ideas, even if it's not their own words, you still need to cite it. Otherwise, it is considered plagiarism. We communicate through memes today, it seems like, so I created this meme for your enjoyment. Please do not take this as a personal challenge because I am very good at my job. I do have skills that I have acquired over a very long career. So just make sure that you do stay away from plagiarism. You wouldn't want to plagiarize anyway because it's so easy not to. It's easy to cite things, whether it's in a speech or in a paper. It only takes a few seconds. Whether it's a direct quote or it's something from a study, statistics, or something like that. It's all stuff that you should be using in papers, in speeches. So it's called evidence. But if it's a direct quote or it's paraphrased, remember that you need to cite it. In a speech, you need to orally cite the information. In other words, you need to say out loud where you got the information, as well as have it in a written form that you turn into a professor or whoever. So you need to cite everything that you use with the exception of common knowledge. Common knowledge is anything that the general public should know if they've been paying attention to life. Sometimes we think something is common knowledge because it's in our wheelhouse, it's in our area of expertise. But if it's something that you learned in a class or learned from watching a documentary or from reading a book, it's not something that would be considered common knowledge in most cases. Of course, you can always ask a professor, you can ask me if something's common knowledge, and I'll give you my best take on that. Of course, sources like Wikipedia are not good sources of information for academe. That would be because it's something that can be edited. And yes, it is a little bit more difficult than it used to be to edit the information, but it's still considered a very light source at best, not something that's academic level. You can cite all kinds of things because all kinds of things can be used for different methods of research. There's plenty of good resources out there for how to cite certain things. If you need help finding those, you can, of course, contact me, or the SBC library is always happy to help with those things as well. If it's got a copyright on it, it needs to be cited. Whether you feel like it's common knowledge or not, make sure that you cite your information. It's always better to err on the side of caution.